Hello, dear listeners. Today we're giving you another Hysteria Home Companion episode from the Patreon/Apple Plus Vault. This bonus episode tells the absolutely wild story behind the absolutely wild story of the Titanic shipwreck, how news of the tragedy traveled to shore as it was all unfolding, and how the press covered the incident before they really knew what was going on. This episode is one of my favorites, and definitely a favorite of our subscribers, told to our producer Miranda and me by our associate producer, sound designer, researcher, and my brother, Riley Swedelius-Smith. If you enjoy this episode, please consider subscribing to American Hysteria at patreon.com/American Hysteria or by subscribing on Apple Plus. Our financial situation has recently changed, and we can really use your support right now to help us continue to be able to both make the show and make sure it's free to all who want it. You'll get ad-free episodes as well as bonus content like Hysteria Home Companion, of which there is a large back catalog, so you'll have plenty to listen to right away. The episode you'll hear today has been edited for the main feed. If you actually subscribe for just $3 a month, these bonus episodes will include sneak peeks of what's coming up, our feelings about the episodes we've made, behind-the-scenes content, and a lot of details about our personal lives and the media that we've been consuming. But most of all, you'll get stories related to the topics that we cover or stories that we just know that you'll love, like this one. So go to patreon.com/American Hysteria or subscribe on Apple Plus. We recommend Patreon. Oh, and one last thing, we have a bunch of new merch available at AmericanHysteria.com that I know you're really going to love. And this month, all profits from the merch go to the Samir Project, a Palestinian-led mutual aid group who are on the ground in Gaza providing food, water, baby formula, diapers, temporary shelter, medical supplies, and cash envelopes directly to displaced families. Again, that's AmericanHysteria.com to get some merch and support the Samir Project. Now please enjoy this fascinating episode called The Titanic in Real Time. Hello, Miranda. I am so happy to be here with you today.
I'm so happy to be here with you. Who else are we here with today, Chelsey?
We are here with our associate producer, researcher, brother, literal brother,
literal
of me.
Brother.
And I guess you, Miranda, in a way.
In a way.
Riley Swedelius-Smith, thank you for being on the show, Riley.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. It's been a while.
I know.
Actually, it's been 84 years.
Nice. Very strong start.
Already off to a banging start here. Yes, last time we talked was about Charles Manson. And as you have alluded to just now with your cleverly timed cinematic joke, what will we be talking about, Riley?
We're talking Titanic today, but it's the part of the story that people don't know about. It's where the movie ends.
Talking Titanic.
Yeah.
Is that good?
The only part of this story that's represented on screen is that wonderful scene where Rose is at the Statue of Liberty.
Oh, yes. Okay. With her little wool blanket on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the diamond in the pocket.
And then they say, "What's your name, miss?"
All right. Should we get into this story?
Yes. Let's sink to the bottom of this ocean.
All right.
With the captain.
Okay, so if we want to get some context out of the way for anybody that's somehow unaware, the Titanic was a British ship that sank on its maiden voyage in April of 1912. It was owned and operated by the White Star Line, which was one of the most powerful shipping companies in the world. And the White Star Line, though it was a British company, was actually owned by an American conglomerate called IMM, International Mercantile Marine, which was owned by J.P. Morgan.
That guy.
The Illuminati.
So that's where he comes into the story. He was apparently supposed to be on the ship, but conveniently he wasn't.
Okay, well, look at that.
What a shame.
Yeah.
Things would look really different today.
So the story of what happened to the Titanic and its survivors after the sinking of the ship has a lot to do with wireless telegraphy. So for some basic background on that, it was invented by Guglielmo Marconi, who first demonstrated the technology in London in 1896 and set up the Marconi Wireless Telegraph Company. He was especially interested in how his technology could be applied to ships and travel, and they didn't waste any time doing it. The first ocean liner to use wireless was the German ship SS Kaiser Wilhelm der Grosse in 1900.
Great German.
Thank you. But even by 1912, there were a lot of ships that didn't have wireless capabilities. And in the days before wireless, if a ship sank, no one would really know about it. It would just kind of vanish.
Wow. Okay. All right.
Yeah. I mean, that's where ships in a bottle come from.
What?
That would be sometimes the only indication of what happened if no other ships were around.
What do you mean?
Well, if people were on a sinking ship, sometimes they would take that time to scribble a message and put it in a bottle so that if it sank and everyone died, then maybe someone would find it and know what happened.
So you mean a message in a bottle, not a because
what did I say?
You said a ship in a bottle, and so I was like, so they're spending their last moments on Earth carefully assembling a ship with tweezers inside of a glass bottle. But no,
Yes.
that's like so weird and sad.
Yes.
Did people actually find
ships in bottles,
messages in bottles that said "Help, the ship sank"?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, totally. They wouldn't even say help because it's like, what would that
Right.
do?
Well, yeah.
It's gone by then.
Remember us.
So if the Titanic didn't have wireless, all of these people, these 700 plus people in lifeboats would have just floated around and probably died because it was so cold.
Well, yeah.
In the North Atlantic. It was so cold that most of the other ships that were around at that time had actually gone and changed their course to steer southward.
Wow.
So that they'd avoid all this ice. I mean, on the bridge of Titanic, they got so many ice warnings. And if they had actually taken these seriously, they would have been able to go to the chart room and map out exactly where this ice field was. But they had such confidence in the shipbuilding of the day that they didn't do that.
Man.
They went full steam ahead into an ice field, and we know what happened.
I mean, it's like, again, it's this hubris, I feel like, that Western nations tend to have. I mean, it reminds me of the Donner Party in a lot of ways, where it was just like, nothing bad can happen because we are, in the Donner Party's case, like sanctioned by God to move westward and expand our nation. And then the Titanic was more like barons of industry proving that they're, indestructible. And it feels like those people are kind of cut from the same cloth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Was there any sanction by God involved in the Titanic? Was there any religious affiliation?
That's a good question.
Well, the name, the Titans, the Titanic was the second in what was supposed to be a trio of ships that were essentially identical.
Yeah.
The first was launched a year before. It was called Olympic, which is another allusion to the Greek mythology.
So it was pagan.
And so it was supposed to be the Olympians, the Titans, and then the third was supposed to be called the Britannic. Of course, saying that the Britons are the ultimate man.
Okay. All right.
And the fourth was called the Hubris.
So on Titanic.
Hubria. Yes, go ahead.
On Titanic, Marconi Wireless was mainly a tool of personal correspondence. Some passengers, especially the rich ones, would fill out a telegraph form in order to send what was essentially a postcard from the sea, a wish you were here kind of message. That was more about the novelty of the technology than any actual purpose. And the way this worked was that they communicated via a shore station, which in this case, once they got closer to North America than to Europe, was a place called Cape Race, which is on the southeastern tip of Newfoundland. So because that station was closer to the ship, it could relay the signal. You go from the shore station to land.
Okay.
And so this is how they'd communicate, and they'd actually have a daily newspaper on board. Some poor soul would have to transcribe this entire newspaper out of dots and dashes.
Wow.
Morse code.
Oh my God.
Ugh, that's so annoying. For some reason, it's like just such a rich person thing to want. Just transcribe the entire newspaper for me. Ugh.
So the Titanic wasn't the first ship to send a distress call over wireless. The first ship was a light ship called the East Goodwin, which was, I think, in 1909. They sent a distress call, which at that time was a CQD. You'd type out the letters CQD, and that meant that you were in distress. And this was successful. They were able to save everyone that was in danger. And then more famously, it was used in an incident in which two ships collided in a heavy fog off the coast of Nantucket, the RMS Republic and the SS Florida. And all the passengers in that case were saved except for 6 that had died in the collision. And this was all because of wireless.
Wow.
So, you know, with the confidence in shipbuilding that the business guys had, they also had, you know, pretty good confidence in this wireless system. There had never been, I don't think, a case in which a ship had called out for help and had not received it up to this point. So, cutting to Titanic, we're on the 4th day of an approximately 6-day voyage from Southampton in England to New York City. So we know that they'd had all these ice warnings, but they went unheeded, and the ship collides with the iceberg. Interestingly, at one point before this, the wireless machine had actually broken down. And so the employees that worked on the wireless, they were employees of the Marconi company. They were not members of the ship's crew. They had kind of an informal relationship with the crew. They were still under the command of the captain, but it was understood that they were kind of something apart.
They were like contractors.
Yeah, contractors. Okay. And the band was too.
Huh.
Yeah. And they had this employee handbook that gave them these strict orders that if the machine broke down, what they were supposed to do is just wait it out until they got to port. And then a maintenance person from the Marconi company would come on board and fix it. They weren't allowed to try to fix their own equipment.
Why didn't they just bring one of those guys with them?
It seems like they should have, right? But
yeah.
Anyway, they thankfully for everybody who lived, they broke the rules and decided to repair the equipment.
Okay.
But if they hadn't, everyone would have died.
God, the real heroes of our story really go unnoticed.
So Titanic strikes the iceberg at 11:40, which is the ship's time. After sounding the ship, designer Thomas Andrews utters the famous words, "It is a mathematical certainty that Titanic will sink." And one of Captain Edward Smith's very first actions was to step into the wireless room. And in there, he found first operator Jack Phillips, along with second operator Harold Bride, who couldn't sleep. So he had offered to relieve Phillips 2 hours ahead of schedule. Because they had broken down for a few hours, they had so many of these horrible, insipid personal messages to send. And so They were waiting, and Captain Smith comes in and tells them that they have to send a distress call. He doesn't tell them the extent of the damage, but he does say it's very urgent. And so the first distress signal was sent by Jack Phillips on Titanic at 12:15, and this is now the morning of the 15th of April, 1912. The message reads, CQD, CQD, MGY, MGY being the Titanic's call sign, and then the coordinates. These signals were sent continuously and communicating with any ship that responded. The messages were expanded over the course of the night to include the phrases, "Have struck iceberg," "We require immediate assistance," "Have struck iceberg and sinking."
Scary.
When Titanic's sister ship, the RMS Olympic, responded, they asked what direction Titanic was steaming, obviously not understanding that the ship was very damaged and not steaming at all. Phillips responded with, "We are putting women off in boats."
Wow.
Wow.
It's just terrifying.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, interestingly, one of the first people to receive the call was this 14-year-old kid named Jimmy Myrick.
Oh.
Jimmy was working at Cape Race. He was an apprentice. And the two operators, Walter Gray and JCR Goodwin, keep in mind this is like a lighthouse they're working with in a remote part of Newfoundland. The two men had left to get some stuff to repair the machine, and little Jimmy was left to jot down any messages while they were away.
Oh my God.
All day Cape Race had been receiving and relaying the various personal messages from Titanic, but come nightfall, the messages had stalled. Now when this cracks in, this distress call, Jimmy hears the letters MGY, and he immediately knows, because he's got a chart right next to him with all the ship's call signs. He knows this is from Titanic. This is the biggest and most famous ship in the world.
Oh my God, Jimmy.
So Jimmy steps outside and calls for the, adults.
Do you mean like he hollers?
Yeah. I think they're on like a tiny, if you've seen The Lighthouse with Robert Pattinson, it's just like that.
Okay.
And so the adults come back in and one of them yells, "My God, the Titanic has struck an iceberg." And then they told little Jimmy that he couldn't tell anyone because they were fearing that they'd lose their jobs if anyone knew that they left this 14-year-old kid in charge.
Kids, if an adult ever tells you to keep a secret, go tell another adult.
Yeah, he could have made some real profit off of that story.
Wow.
Is this an account from Jimmy, or where did this story come from?
I had kind of a hard time trying to figure that out. I think it was a relative of his.
Oh, okay.
That finally broke the story. I don't know whether he was alive or not at this time. I assume he was, but it was 50 years later.
Oh, wow.
No one knew that story for 50 years.
Okay, so why would it have been their fault, and why would they have lost their job? Because they weren't in the lighthouse at that time?
Yeah, I think, a receiving station like Cape Race, you had to be on a 24-hour watch.
Wow.
Which is crazy that the 24-hour watch was covered by 2 people.
Yeah, no kidding. And a 14-year-old boy. And
Cape Race was a receiving station, so the rules were different. On ships, you weren't required to have a 24-hour watch. And that's actually, there's a whole nother story I won't go into, but there is a ship called the Californian that was nearby. Not super close, but still they could see the Titanic in the distance.
Whoa.
And they didn't have a 24-hour watch. They had a radio, but, everyone was asleep, basically.
Man.
And so they could have saved everybody, and they didn't.
Seems like there are so many moments like that with the Titanic where it's something was just barely missed. And I don't know, it seemed like it was destined to go down, and with all of the various just unfortunate happenings that were just all happening on the same night.
Perfect storm.
So, okay. So Jimmy is taking these distress calls, telling these guys in the lighthouse.
We're focused on Jimmy, Riley. The rest of this episode is going to be about little Jimmy.
I'm just thinking of what a 14-year-old in this time period would do. And I feel like you didn't just be whatever.
Well, I think he was just excited. And we'll find this over the course of the story that it was just, wireless was the social media of the time. It was instant.
Wow.
Nobody had that before.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
The people who were on wireless radios, they were hearing the story in real time. So it's just nuts.
Wow.
Okay. More after this. And now back to the show.
So we're going to cut over to another location now.
Take us there.
This is a ship called the RMS Carpathia, a smaller ship, and it operates under the Cunard Line, which was the other big British shipping company at that time. Carpathia was bound from New York to the Mediterranean. It was more of a cruise situation. So there were a lot of kind of older people on board bound for a nice holiday. That wouldn't happen. So wireless operator, his name was Harold Cotton. He had been hearing Titanic all day, and he had even relayed an ice warning to Jack Phillips, who was an old friend of his from the Marconi Academy. But come the evening, he noticed that Titanic's chatter had stalled, and that messages from Cape Race were apparently going out to the large ship unnoticed. And back then, these wireless operators, they're kind of the tech bros of the era, and they had this funny kind of shorthand of communicating. So after he took a little break, Cotton powered up his Marconi machine and decided to see if Jack Phillips was all right. So he messaged GMOM, which stands for Good Morning, Old Man.
Oh,
G-Mom.
That's so cute.
He says, "Do you know there are messages for you at Cape Race?" A moment later, signals from all ships and stations all around began chattering away all at once. That was kind of a difficulty. If you were trying to reach a vast amount of people over wireless, people would just talk over each other in Morse code, and you wouldn't be able to hear anything. But then, because the Titanic's radio was so strong, suddenly it cut through, and Jack Phillips messages him and cuts through and says, "CQD SOS, come at once. We've struck a berg. It's a CQD, old man."
Damn. Okay. This is like so wild. I don't know what I ever thought, like how I thought these communications were happening, or like, I don't know. This is just very fascinating. Okay.
Yeah. So Harold caught him. He bursts out of the wireless room and sprints up to the bridge of the Carpathia, where he finds the ship's first officer, tells him what's happening, and then together they burst into the cabin of Captain Arthur Rostron, who's lying, trying to go to sleep in his bunk. And he looks up like, what the hell are you guys doing? Don't you knock? But then they tell him the news, Titanic is sinking, and he doesn't hesitate at all. He's like a real hero of the story. Immediately, he turns the ship around sharply to the northeast. And they're 58 miles away from Titanic, which is, on water is longer. And so full steam's ordered to the Carpathia's boilers. And it basically begins this daring rescue mission. Rostron gives these orders. He rattles off this whole list of orders, telling his crew to do all these things, just little things, even like put lights on the side of the ship so that survivors will see us coming. Have ropes and slings and rope ladders ready to receive survivors. Have hot tea and soup and brandy ready for survivors.
Wow, what an unsung hero. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Cottam goes back to the wireless machine, and then he receives another message from Jack Phillips. Come as quickly as possible, old man. She is taking water, and it's up to the boilers. After that, it was only static. So once Carpathia reached the icy waters in the northern lanes, lookouts actually has to be positioned on the ship's bow because it's just as icy as it was when Titanic hit the iceberg. So you have lookouts on the bow watching out physically with their eyes for icebergs that the ship at full speed has to maneuver around to get to these survivors.
Oh my God.
Was it maneuvering around them? Like, were there...
Oh, sure, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, there were icebergs everywhere.
Wow.
And Captain Rostron was a very religious man, so he just sat in the bridge, looked dead ahead, and just prayed the whole 4 hours it took them to get there.
So that means if it took 4 hours, that means like ships go maybe like 10 to 15 miles an hour, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's in knots, which I don't understand.
Sure. Yeah.
But I understand that they were probably going the equivalent of 16 or 17 miles per hour.
Okay. That was a very heroic, risky thing to do, right? Because it seems like they could have just easily gone the way of the Titanic.
Sure.
Well, and it's also a risk for all the people on board. That's like a tough decision to make that quickly because you're also risking the lives of all the people in this cruise.
Yeah, it is a passenger liner.
You're on this cruise. You're just like, oh my God, now we're maneuvering through a field of icebergs.
But you think about these old Floridian retirees. It's probably kind of fun for them.
Yeah. They've got those little glasses you wear in a tanning booth on. What's going on?
So we're going to cut again to a strange place.
Is little Jimmy there?
No, that's the end of little Jimmy, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
Hollering Jimmy.
You're going to meet a new character.
Okay.
High up on the roof of the Wanamaker department store in New York City, a Marconi operator named David Sarnoff was drifting in and out of sleep because he was listening to basically nothing over the radio. It was midnight. The store's owner was a man named John Wanamaker, and he was kind of an eccentric. He was always interested in his store having the newest and weirdest and greatest technologies. And he made this weird choice to mount a large antenna on top of his department store and keep a 24-hour manned Marconi machine on top of his building.
Huh.
So it's here that sleepy David Sarnoff became one of the very first people in North America to hear in real time that the Titanic had struck an iceberg and was sinking. The signal was weak, but he knew immediately what he was. And so he got on the phone and started telling people.
Wow, Sleepy David.
Sleepy David and Hollering Jimmy. This sounds so much like Twitter. Like when something big happens on Twitter and it just, the noise is so great. And there's so many people talking all at once, but there's that first person that gets the story. I don't know. It's very interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The Twitter of the past.
Yes.
The Twitter of 2022.
Yes, true. Yeah, I
Not
don't
the
even know what's going on over there now. Yeah.
And thank God for that.
Yeah, wireless was really, it was all the rage. And there was a lot of particularly young men and boys that were really interested, kind of proto nerds of the day. And there was amateur enthusiasts that had their own wireless sets all over the country. There was one guy named Samuel Kerr. He was 20 years old, and he had much to his father's chagrin, set up a large antenna on top of their house in Pittsburgh. And that night, he just happened to be hanging out with his buddies, William and Fred. And they were listening in, just seeing what they could hear. Samuel had told them that he had heard signals from ships before. He said that he even heard the distress signal sent by the Republic in 1909, the one that had that collision off the coast of Nantucket. And his friends, they didn't really believe him, but they still thought it was really cool. So they were listening in. And so on that night, he picked up the message, CQD-MGY, we have collision with iceberg, sinking. And because he was such a enthusiast for wireless, and because he kept up in the newspapers and magazines about it, Samuel knew all about Titanic. He knew that its call sign was MGY, and he knew that the signal was coming from that ship. So he ran upstairs and woke up his parents to tell them that the most famous ship in the world was sinking as they spoke.
Do you think they believed him at first, or were they like, "You're having a dream, go back to bed"?
Probably. Yeah. I'm sure they went right back to sleep.
Like in Lost World Jurassic Park, when he's like, "Mom, Dad, there's a dinosaur outside my window."
Mom, Dad, the Titanic is sinking. All right. So finally, an official hears this news. At 2:00 a.m. in New York, the telephone rang at the home of Philip Franklin, who was the vice president of the International Mercantile Marine, which owned the White Star Line. And so Franklin picks up the phone in bed, and he hears the voice of an Associated Press officer asking for a comment about Titanic, which had struck an iceberg. This is the first time Franklin has heard about this.
Right.
And he says, "Where did you hear that?" And the guy from the press says, "Well, I heard it from a shipping company operating out of Montreal. They had received a message from the ocean liner Virginian, who had received a message from Titanic." Franklin was now wide awake, and he shouts down the telephone at the reporter. He says, "Stuff and nonsense. The Titanic would shatter an iceberg into a frappe. Don't call me again."
Oh my God. Wow. I want that embroidered on something.
Yeah, I want to stay with this guy.
We're going to stay with this guy. He's a character. Anyway.
Say more things.
Franklin wants, he doesn't believe it, but he still has to make sure it's his job. So he phones the head of IMM, and it's decided that they're going to put out a message to Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic, to see what's happening. Okay, now we have another character.
Okay.
We're at the New York Times main office in New York.
Okay, I'm there. I hear it.
I can feel it and
clacking away.
Smell it, yeah.
So, in the early 20th century, one of the first things to adopt Marconi wireless technology was newspapers. It makes sense. They can get news before anyone else that way.
Mm-hmm.
So at 1:20 a.m., a copy boy is sleeping in an editorial room of the Times.
Oh my God.
Where he's woken up by one of those pneumatic tubes like at the bank.
Oh my God. I love those.
Yeah, right?
Like those ones that suck stuff up.
Yeah. But in this case, I think it sucked it down.
God, Riley, I remember being with Mom when she went to the bank a lot. Do you remember this? And she'd put all her little business receipts into her little thingy, and it would suck it up. Yeah.
Yeah, they were the best.
Those are so cool. Why don't we use those anymore?
I don't know. I think, do they not?
No.
I mean, I don't know. I've never deposited a check at a drive-through bank before in my life.
Yeah, but they exist.
I mean, isn't that essentially what the internet is? It's just a bunch of those tubes sucking things up and putting them somewhere else.
Yeah, metaphorically.
Patrons, do banks still suck things up? Leave us a message in the comments.
No, they don't. God, I bet somewhere they do, though. I bet somewhere some little town has one of those sucky banks.
I'm betting you guys that there are still sucky bank tubes out there.
Sucky tube banks.
I'm going to retire to that town. Anyway, so this copy boy, he gets this paper, which is transcribed from Morse, and he sees it and freaks out, runs upstairs to the office of his managing editor, who is a man named Carr Van Anda. The copy boy, whose name is lost to time, then reads the report. And it reads the following. From Cape Race, Newfoundland, Sunday night, April 14th, AP at 10:25 o'clock, New York time. Tonight, the White Star Line steamship Titanic called CQD to the Marconi station here and reported having struck an iceberg. The steamer said that immediate assistance was needed. So Van Anda is, we can imagine a grizzled old newsman. He's amazed by this. but he knows that he has to be cautious. You know, you can't jump the gun and run the story without finding more information.
It's not a gossip blog, yeah.
So he decides that he's going to call White Star Line's office in New York, as well as reporters in Canada, because a lot of this information was coming from Montreal. He received no confirmation, but he was able to determine that at least 6 ships had received distress calls from Titanic and were steaming toward Titanic as fast as they could, including Carpathia and Olympic. And he knew that running the story would be a gamble, but he'd worked in the press for many years, and he had kind of, you know, that sixth sense reporters have sometimes about news. He also knew that Titanic's transmissions had gone dark only moments after distress calls were sent that mentioned that women were being loaded into lifeboats. So he knew it didn't look good.
Yeah.
And so for the morning edition of the New York Times, he played it relatively safe. And the front page read, "New liner Titanic hits an iceberg, sinking by the bow at midnight. Women put off in lifeboats. Last wireless at 12:27 a.m. blurred." However, the city edition, which came out, I think, in the afternoon, he decided to really put his reputation on the line, but he went with his gut, and he bumped a story at the last minute about a feud between then current President Taft and former President Roosevelt. And so the front page of the New York Times famously said, "Titanic sinks 4 hours after hitting iceberg. 866 rescued by Carpathia. Probably 1,250 perish. Ismay safe. Mrs. Astor maybe. Noted names missing."
Wow. Oh, so that's probably how a lot of people found out that like their loved ones were probably dead, right? Would be from the paper.
Yes, but there were no names printed.
Right.
So
right. Wow. Okay.
The thing about it, though, was that the Times was basically the only newspaper that went ahead and said it sunk because there was so little information and people were so confident and didn't want to spread panic. So I have some other headlines here from the same day. The New York Herald had the headline, "The new Titanic hit by iceberg. Appeals for aid," says the wireless report. The Evening Times in Rhode Island reported, "Giant steamship Titanic collides with iceberg. Passengers safely transferred to Carpathia."
That is like has way more assumption in it than the New York Times article, it feels like.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And even some papers, when they were talking about what had happened, they described Titanic's collision with the iceberg as an encounter. Or one of them even said it was just a nudge.
Oh my God.
A nudge with an iceberg.
An encounter with
little kiss.
iceberg. Yeah.
Make them kiss. That is so... Wow.
So everybody is scrambling. Amateur radio enthusiasts, people from the press, people from White Star Line and IMM. Everybody is trying to figure out what had happened. And, you know, when we go from the morning into the afternoon, this is still playing out in real time on the 15th of April. And so there's so little information. So if we cut back to IMM, Philip Franklin, the vice president, he'd spent his entire morning trying to the best of his ability to gather as much information as he could regarding the situation. He anticipated that once the story hit the papers, the New York White Star Line offices would be flooded with reporters. So even though he couldn't get much information from Olympic or any other ship, he felt it was his responsibility to go to the White Star office and address the crowd. And he said, quote, "We place absolute confidence in the Titanic. We believe that the boat is unsinkable and nothing but inconvenience will be suffered by the passengers."
Nobody's unsinkable but Molly Brown.
Truly. Wow. Okay. Well, that's like pretty typical of a business in panic. Yeah.
Everything's fine until we know it isn't.
Yeah.
So later that day, Franklin finally heard from the Olympic, and the Olympic reported that Carpathia had picked up Titanic's passengers and lifeboats, and that another liner, the Baltic, was closing in on the scene to provide further assistance. As for the Titanic itself, Franklin still had no reason to suspect it had sunk. And then, in a move that inadvertently spread more misinformation, Franklin wired back to the Olympic to relay a rumor that had spread rapidly through New York that morning, that Titanic had been damaged, but not critically, and that she was traveling to Halifax under her own power or being towed by another ocean liner.
And that just like came out of absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, that was like, with all these wireless signals on top of each other, sometimes they'd get jumbled.
Yeah.
And so people, even like these amateurs, would hear this message. It might be like, like in Friends, half of the custard recipe and half of the trifle recipe or whatever.
Beautiful metaphor.
Tastes like feet.
I like it.
And then they just spread this, and it just, it became a feedback loop of misinformation.
Which is interesting because I think generally these types of rumors are more like scare lore, where it seems like the scariest possibility would spread. But I guess in a way, this was like self-soothing to spread this rumor because it was such a terrifying moment.
And he's already going into damage control because the IMM stocks are fluctuating wildly at this point.
Oh yeah. Fuck yeah.
And so, this rumor about Titanic being towed to Halifax, that's what he told a lot of the families that were showing up at his office, especially the wealthy ones, the Astors and the Guggenheims. They were just pestering IMM and White Star and calling endlessly. And so Franklin assured them everything's fine, and he was so confident that he actually arranged for a train to go up to Halifax and pick up the survivors.
So you think he thought that?
Yeah. I mean, imagine if you're a family member and you get on that train.
Yeah, he wasn't just lying for the investors or the market. He actually believed.
It seems like he believes it. I mean, it was so unheard of for something like this to happen to a large ship.
Right.
Ships have been getting so big so fast, and a disaster of this scale had just not happened yet.
Wow.
Okay, so we're going to go on board the Olympic now, Titanic's sister ship. On board Olympic, Marconi wireless operator E.J. Moore was refusing requests from passengers and members of the press to send messages because he was still trying to figure out throughout the morning and afternoon of April 15th what had happened to Titanic. Jack Phillips was a friend of his, and so he kept trying to radio him and get any update. But he had to kind of field these messages he was getting. One of the messages said, "We'll pay you liberally for story of rescue of Titanic's passengers." He was being offered money. He could have named his price for the story if he wanted to.
Yeah.
But he had no information to give. So all day he's waiting, and they're going toward the scene, and nobody knows what happens. And the Carpathia has kind of been dark this whole time. And then suddenly the Carpathia cuts back in with this message. "I received distress calls from the Titanic at 11:20, and we proceeded to the spot mentioned. On arrival at daybreak, we saw field ice 25 miles long, apparently solid, and a quantity of wreckage and a number of boats full of people. We raised about 670 souls. The Titanic has sunk. She went down in about 2 hours. Captain and all engineers lost. Our captain sent orders there was no need for the Baltic to come any further, so with that she returned on her course to Liverpool. Are you going to resume your course on that information? We have 2 or 3 officers aboard and the second Marconi operator who has been creeping his way through water 30 degrees sometimes. Mr. Ismay is aboard." So you finally there have your confirmation that the Titanic sunk.
Yeah. Feel free to tell me this is a stupid question, but are all of these messages in Morse code?
Yes, they are.
That message is in Morse code. Okay. All right. Just checking.
And so the operator Moore immediately relayed this message to the captain of the Olympic, and then he sent it to Cape Race. And this is something I couldn't really find out why, but that message took 2 hours to reach New York for some reason.
Because it was so long.
Yeah, probably.
Sorry.
But in that amount of time, even more misinformation spread. And wireless operators throughout New York were getting their wires crossed, and they didn't get any updates from Carpathia. And at 2:00 p.m., the following message was widely distributed around the city. It said, "All passengers of the Titanic safely transferred to the ship and SS Parisian. Sea calm. Titanic being towed by Allen liner Virginian to port." So again, we have this rumor going around. And, these poor families, it's like back and forth.
God.
Yeah.
And so on the basis of this information, the New York Sun then ran the headline, "All saved from Titanic after collision."
No.
Yeah, the New York Sun
Proceeded to attack the Times for irresponsibly spreading the alarming news that Titanic had sunk.
Oh, please.
My God.
More after this. And now back to the show.
Okay, so do we remember sleepy David Sarnoff at the roof of the department store?
Of course we do.
He's been listening all day, and amidst all the chatter, he finally gets this faint signal, and unusually, it wasn't from Cape Race. It was actually directly from the Olympic, it had to be very calm weather for a ship that far out on the ocean to actually get a direct message to land. And so he gets the message from Olympic that I just read, that it had sunk. And so he is the first one that spreads the true story of what had happened. And so now we get people reacting to it. Back at the offices of IMM, Philip Franklin, he has to address the crowd again. He had just said that he had the utmost confidence in the ship, that it was unsinkable. But now he acknowledges that even though he doesn't know the numbers, there has been a terrible loss of life. And he says this: "We are hopeful that the rumors which have reached us by telegraph from Halifax that there are passengers aboard the Virginian and the Parisian will prove to be true, and that these vessels will turn up some of the passengers. It is the loss of life that makes this thing so awful."
Thanks for that.
Kind of an understatement.
It's not me that makes this story awful. It's the loss of life. There's that passive voice.
And so as it's midnight now, April 15th going into 16th, White Star and IMM receive the confirmation from Cape Race directly. They can no longer deny that the Titanic has sunk. So Franklin goes out into the crowd and actually weeps. And he said, "I thought her unsinkable, and I based my opinion on the best expert advice. I do not understand it." The crowd looked on as relatives of the famous passengers and millionaires, arrived at the White Star office. The first was John Jacob Astor's son, Vincent, who exited the office with tears in his eyes. Benjamin Guggenheim's wife, Florette, pleaded with White Star officials to send a rescue ship, worrying that Mr. Guggenheim may be lost at sea in an unaccounted for lifeboat. And she kept saying, "He may be drifting about."
Oh,
sad. I'm sorry. It's sad. What, did Guggenheim end up being saved, or was he among the...
No, he died. Oh. He died. He famously said, somebody tried to hand him a lifeboat, and he said, "No, we are dressed in our best and are prepared to go down as gentlemen."
Oh, that's right.
Us being him and his valet. So at Times Square, even at 1 a.m., a crowd of 4,000 people were gathered to try and get the latest updates. Just glued to the story, civilians,
Yeah.
And the newspaper offices had a bulletin board outside. And so as they finally started receiving a list of survivors off the Carpathia, they were posting them. And so if you were a family member, that's what you had to do to find out as quickly as you could. So we're going to jump back to Carpathia, who has rescued the surviving Titanic passengers in the lifeboats.
Okay.
When Captain Rostron was satisfied that he had located all of Titanic's survivors and gotten them safely aboard his ship, he then had to decide where to go next. Carpathia's original destination was Gibraltar, but with all these extra passengers, they no longer had enough provisions to make the crossing. The Olympic had offered, via radio, to pick up Titanic survivors and bring them to New York. But when Rostron got this offer, he decided to go to White Star Line chairman Bruce Ismay, who famously had saved himself and was bundled up nice and warm in the private doctor's office aboard Carpathia.
Oh my God.
And so he said, "What do you think?" And Ismay shuddered at the thought, because loading Titanic's traumatized survivors onto a third ship, especially one identical to the one that had just sunk, was almost unthinkable.
Well, I guess that was the right call.
Yeah.
Trauma informed is what we call that.
Exactly. Bruce's may redeemed.
No.
So Halifax was the nearest port, but the route was still riddled with icebergs. So figuring the survivors had probably seen enough ice for one day, Captain Rostron decided that they would go to Titanic's original destination of New York City.
Oh, wow.
He ordered the wireless man, Cottam, to communicate that Carpathia was making way for New York with some 700 Titanic survivors, and then he authorized Cottam to send an initial list of survivors. After that, it was radio silence from Carpathia, because the captain decided that the full details would have to wait. The press would have to wait, because what mattered now was getting a count of the survivors, getting the list out, and then all the extra radio waves were reserved for contacting loved ones directly.
That's great. Okay, that's good.
He refused all requests from the press, and he even refused President Taft President Taft had one of his main military advisors and close personal friend, Archibald Butt, aboard Titanic. And he wanted to know if Archie was okay. He wasn't.
Okay.
But Carpathia wouldn't answer him. And he actually sent out a little ship to go intercept Carpathia.
Oh my God.
He couldn't wait.
Wow.
But they refused.
I'm looking at a picture of Taft, and yeah, he is like such a guy with a giant mustache.
This has been political commentary from Chelsey Weber-Smith.
Giant mustache.
So poor Harold caught him on the radio on the Carpathia. He's at this point been awake for 24 hours, and he literally just passes out onto the radio set.
Oh.
Captain Rostron needs somebody to take over, and there's nobody else but Harold Bride, who was the Marconi man on Titanic, one of two and the only one that survived. So Harold Bride, who survived, but his feet were severely frostbitten and wrapped in bandages, he hobbles on into the radio room and takes over.
Oh my gosh.
And so the list that they sent out was the only direct communication that they had with America. And so, you know, there's these 3 days where Carpathia is slowly steaming back to New York. And that's all anybody knows. They have the list of survivors, but they don't know, is that the only list? Is there another ship? You know, we've been hearing reports, maybe there's another ship that has more survivors. There's still no reason to think that it's been as horrible as a disaster as we now know it was.
Yeah.
And so the press are just scrambling to get any piece of information. And there's actually a reporter named Carlos Hurd who was on board Carpathia. He was one of the passengers going on a nice vacation. And he worked for a Hearst-owned newspaper in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
And so he started chatting with survivors, kind of conducting informal interviews and writing down anything he could. And then when the crew would come around, he'd hide his messages because they'd probably give him a hard time for hassling these survivors. And so he hides his information away, and we'll come back to that later.
Ooh.
God, the press is just, it's just so...
I mean...
I get it. Yeah, go ahead.
But that's like, it's nice that we have that. Of course, I don't know. Riley said we're going to talk about it later, so I'll withhold my commentary.
All right, we'll reserve judgment. All right.
Okay, so back in New York now, Marconi himself, the man who invented this technology, happened to be there.
Oh, shit.
And Marconi stocks soared as IMM stocks plummeted.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
He managed to actually get a message to Harold Bride on board the Carpathia and mentioned a 4-figure sum if he were to share his story exclusively with Mr. Marconi, who was working with the New York Times. And he set up a hotel room and told him, you know, I'll intercept you when you dock.
Whoa.
And Harold Bride was basically like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, shit.
I mean, that's his boss, you know, if his boss says it's fine.
Yeah. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
The Carpathia is scheduled to arrive Thursday night. This is April 18th. It's due to arrive around 9:00 at night. And the crowds are crazy and the press is crazy. And the New York Times wanted, of course, to get a leg up on everyone else. And so the editor at that time, a man named Arthur Greaves, he sent a message to his team of reporters, and it read this: "The Carpathia with Titanic survivors is due tonight around 9. She has not answered wireless requests for information. AP just sent us this note, quote, 'We have no assurance that we will get any wireless news from Carpathia, as this vessel studiously refuses to answer all queries. I'm sending 16 of you down to the pier, though we only have 4 passes. Men without passes will have to try and get through to survivors, crew, and passengers on their police cards. Get all you can. Get Captain Rostron of the Carpathia. Get Bruce Ismay of White Star. Get every possible member of the Titanic's crew, especially the 4 officers who were saved. We must get the Titanic's wireless man's story if he's alive.'"
Wow.
So he's telling his guys, you know, you got to get in there. And everybody's trying to get in there, even just, you know, people. If I may, I've got a little passage from a book I should have mentioned earlier.
It's all right.
This book that I'm taking a lot of this information from is a great book called 160 Minutes, The Race to Save the RMS Titanic by William Hazel Grove. It's a pretty recent book. It's really good.
Great title.
Yeah. So here's the scene. 9:15, New York, April 18th, 1912. Out of the fog came the ship like a ghost. Her bow lights emerged first, and then the glittering lights high up on the bridge. A foghorn announced her arrival as the steamship glided up the Ambrose Channel toward the waiting world. Brilliant magnesium flashes from photographers on boats framed the RMS Carpathia. The blackened soot from her funnels roiled into the moisture-laden air. Launches hired by newspapers to get the first quotes from survivors of the Titanic bobbed around in the swell generated by the lantern-lit ship. The smaller boats maneuvering in the white-capped wake of Carpathia jockeyed for position as reporters shouted questions promising hundreds of dollars for a quote. A voice rose up over the thrum of the steam engines and the shouts of men with megaphones. "Are you one of the Titanic survivors?" A woman shouted back. "Yes," the voice replied hesitantly. "Do you need help?" The reporters were hanging on like monkeys to the railings of the launches bobbing in the waves created by Carpathia. From somewhere along the railing of pale faces on Carpathia came the voice again. "No." "If there is anything you want done, it will be attended to," the reporter shouted in the closest launch, daring fate by coming perilously close to the giant liner. "Thank you," came the reply.
Wow.
That's incredible writing.
Yeah, it's a very well written book.
Yeah.
Such an iconic person.
Yes.
No, thank you. So at this point, this is the Cunard Pier in New York. And so we've got 30,000 onlookers spilling into Battery Park, just waiting to see Carpathia arrive, because they knew that this was really the conclusion of the story.
Yeah.
The information that we don't have, we'll have shortly when the ship finally arrives. And a lot of reporters actually noted that as the ship arrived, there was kind of this respectful silence that happened over the crowd.
Wow.
Members of the press in as many as 50 tugboats tailed the Carpathia as she steamed down the Hudson toward the dock. Carlos Hurd, the man from the Hearst paper, recognized a Hearst editor on board one of these tugboats. He folded up his notes in a cigar box and stuffed it with champagne corks so that it would float. He threw the box overboard and it was promptly picked up and sent away for immediate publication.
What?
Men from the press yelled, sometimes through megaphones, toward the Carpathia, hoping to get sound bites or secure interviews with passengers that lined her railings. Monetary offers were made to survivors, and one newspaper man even managed to get aboard Carpathia before she docked. He was promptly punched by a crewman and restrained until the talking was complete.
Nice.
Captain Rostron let all of the Carpathia's original passengers disembark first, and he encouraged the Titanic survivors not to leave unless they had family or close friends waiting to pick them up. The crowd and press anxiously waited for the first Titanic survivor, a woman whose identity is not known, but was widely reported in newspapers as wearing, quote, makeshift clothes, as she came down the gangplank and, quote, fell into the arms of an officer as she stepped on the Cunard, Pier 54. As more survivors made their way onto land, they were hounded by press, hoping to get a quote or anything they could print. Survivor Ruth Blanchard, 12 years old at the time, remembered years later that the reporter's questions made her mom cry. She could not talk about Titanic to anyone and relied on Ruth to recount what had happened.
God.
But this is nice, this part.
Okay, good.
Because unlike the press, survivors recounted that the American public waiting at the pier were actually very warm, sympathetic, and generous, handing them whatever money they had in their pockets. A committee from the New York Stock Exchange even mustered up $20,000 to be handed out to the survivors who looked like they needed it most.
Oh, God, I'm tearing.
Nurses from the Red Cross, doctors, and ambulances stood by waiting to care for injured passengers. 50 automobiles lined the streets during a time in which they were still relatively uncommon. Vincent Astor stood waiting for the ship to arrive, maybe clinging to the belief that his wealthy father might still be among the saved. And J.P. Morgan Jr. was also there, representing his dad. Mr. Marconi was also waiting, and he was actually allowed to come aboard the ship. He immediately made way for the wireless room, where he finally relieved Harold Bride of his duty.
Aww.
Marconi's men had to literally carry Bride off the ship because of his frostbitten feet, and they quickly made their way for the Strand Hotel, where Times editor Card Van Anda had booked an entire floor and set up direct telephone lines to the Times headquarters. It was here that Harold Bride sat down in a room full of men puffing cigars and told his story, This would be printed in 5 columns as a New York Times exclusive.
Wow.
You know, the Titanic story, people say, is really what made the New York Times what it is today.
Really?
I was going to ask. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, at Pier 54, that's where all of the modern kind of myth and legend of Titanic was born. Just survivors chatting to reporters. You know, everything that we know about it. The collision with the iceberg, the heroic actions of the crew loading the lifeboats, the band playing Nearer My God to Thee, and the screams as the ship went into the water. That was all put into the papers and immediately known around the world. I was on newspapers.com looking at the pages, you know, the newspapers from the day. And it's like, you know, the first like 3 pages of any given newspaper were just full of interviews with survivors and anything they could get their hands on.
Wow. I bet that was a fun trip down to our favorite website, newspapers.com. Please sponsor us. Yeah.
I'm going to finish up. I've got a quote from a man named Isaac Russell. He was a reporter at the New York Times. After he interviewed some survivors, he rushed back to his office to start typing. And later he said, quote, "I turned back to my typewriter. They say literature is truth touched by emotion. I have written steadily for 20 years or more. If I ever wrote literature, that was the night."
Wow.
That was beautiful. Great story.
Thank you.
What a journey. Yeah, what a journey, like a true journey.
You know what I can't stop thinking about?
Little Jimmy?
Holler and Jimmy.
Holler and Jimmy. I hate to be predictable here, but I really can't stop thinking about how good this would be as a musical.
Wow.
Yeah, no kidding.
Like all these vignettes of the people like learning this new information and all of these characters and these different like I really think it would make a great musical.
Wow. No, I agree with you completely. Okay, let's jot that down.
It's so underrepresented, you know, when we talk about Titanic. I mean, it's a wonderful, rich story as it is, you know, and as horrible as it is.
Yeah.
But this, you know, this rescue and what happened next is so often forgotten.
Yeah.
Just the fact that 705 or however many it was, people survived is really extraordinary. I mean, you know, of course, Titanic didn't have enough lifeboats, and of course,
not enough by half.
There could have been more still done. Yeah, but the crew behaved so well and actually saved so many people, even though it was, you know, of course, it was disproportionately first and second class. But it was actually a very successful rescue for the times. And if you look over the newspapers from the day, that's often what they fixate on. You know, I mean, with news at any time, I think, you know, we often try to look for the positives in a situation, and, you know, people were really celebrated. I mean, Captain Rostron on the Carpathia was decorated.
Yeah, he better be.
Oh, Captain, my Captain.
Yeah.
He was actually promoted not long after to Commodore of the entire Cunard line.
Good for him.
Yeah.
And this story is like so interesting because it is kind of the story of the story, right? It's like how a major event begins to be told and how like desperate we are for the story before the story's even finished, right? And I think that that's such an interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's strange that we don't focus more on that. And I want to go down to newspapers.com and look at that myself because I bet it's so interesting.
Yeah, I think so.
Wow.
I would like to mention one more time the book I read.
Please.
160 Minutes, The Race to Save the RMS Titanic by William Hazelgrove. I actually have a signed copy somehow. I'm trying to get one, but it's kind of neat.
Look at you. Put it next to your ship in a bottle.
I also got some information from a documentary called, it's in 2 parts. The first is called Titanic, Birth of a Legend, and the second is called Titanic, Death of a Dream.
Wow.
Oh,
it's an A&E documentary series from the mid-90s that is still the best documentary on Titanic by far. So
cool.
I recommend everyone go check it out.
Great. Well, definitely we encourage our listeners to read and watch these pieces of media. Wow. I love that. Well, thank you for doing this and sharing all that story. It was
my pleasure.
Beautifully done.
Thank you.
Yes. Bravo.
Ugh. Yeah, the musical, I'm really going to be thinking about that.
Yeah, we're writing a musical.
Yep,
it's called 160 Minutes. It writes itself.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding.
This was American Hysteria, or rather, Hysteria Home Companion. If you enjoyed this episode and want to support our show, please consider becoming a subscriber at either patreon.com/American Hysteria or by subscribing on Apple Plus. You'll get ad-free episodes as well as access to Hysteria Home Companion, which has a big back catalog, so there'll be plenty to listen to right away. You can also pick up some of our merch at AmericanHysteria.com and support the Samir Project. American Hysteria's and Hysteria Home Companion's producer and editor is Miranda Zickler. Our associate producer and co-host for this episode is Riley Swedelius-Smith, and the theme song for Hysteria Home Companion is by Emily Westman. And I'm your producer/host, Chelsey Weber-Smith. Thanks, as always, for listening, and I hope you have a great